In this video, we will talk about the 4 primary ways that you can trigger a scripting block from within Airtable. All of these methods have different considerations and things you want to think about, so we will talk about those things in this video. If you are looking for a specific tutorial, step-by-step on how to do any of these methods, check out the links in the description or head over to our YouTube channel. If you haven't used a scripting block before, what it allows you to do is bring code into your base, and once you start using code, really the sky's the limit. You can do kind of whatever you can code. What I like to do is I like to take my data from Airtable, use a webhook in a scripting block, and send data from Airtable to Make.com. Once my data from Airtable is in Make.com, then I can send it wherever. What I'm often doing is creating a document with it. So I'm storing my data in Airtable and I'm triggering a document automation in Make and using Formstack Documents. We've got a lot of tutorials on that on our channel of how to create document automations. And we've also got Document Automation University, which is on nocodecollab.com. So check out those things. But let's now take a look at the 4 ways that you can trigger a scripting block from within Airtable. There are 2 primary places inside of Airtable where you can create a scripting block. The first is the automation panel, and the second is through Airtable extensions. Now, the important thing to know here is that you can't share scripts or scripting blocks across these 2 locations. So what I mean by that is if you create an Airtable extension, you add the scripting block, you write up your whole script, and then you decide later that I want to automatically trigger this through an automation. You will have to rewrite that script inside a scripting block in an automation. You can't access the Airtable script in the extension. You can't access that from automation. So where you create it actually really matters. So let's look at the 4 methods now, and let's start with kind of our condition-based triggering. So this is going to be automatic. These are going to be the situations where if a record is created, or if a record enters a view, or a record meets certain conditions, then we are going to trigger a scripting block. So jumping over to Airtable, if I head up to my automations panel, I can see in my whole automations list, I can see that when a record matches certain conditions, one of my actions can be to run a script. And you can see here that my script is 2 lines of code that's actually sending a webhook to Make.com. So that is the first way, is I've got conditions that are met. Once those conditions are met, then I can run a script. So that is method 1. So the second method is similar to the first in that we are creating an Airtable script inside of our automations. But what we're going to do is we are going to put a button on an interface. So when a user clicks on that button, we are going to trigger the running of an automation. And in that automation, we've got an Airtable script. So it's similar in that in our automations panel, we are going to have a trigger and a script. The only difference is that the trigger is not condition-based. The trigger is on the click of a button. And so that's one of our trigger options, is when a button is clicked. And then on our interface, we can see that if I click on a record, I can have a button on that interface page. And when I click that button, then my automation is going to run. And if we look at the actual script, we can see that it is very similar. And all it's doing is firing a webhook that's going to Make.com. So that is option 2, adding a button on an interface. Similar to our second method for triggering an Airtable script, our third method is also a button click, but instead of on a interface page where a user clicks it, this button lives inside of a data view. So we add a field, we actually add a button field to our base, and we hook that button up to an Airtable extension that is our script. So this is really good if you still want to have some manual oversight into when a script runs and you're not creating an interface. So instead of with option 1, these scripts automatically run. If it meets certain conditions, it's just going to go. And that can be really nice because you don't have to think about it. Things just happen in the background. But there are times when you want to have some more manual intervention and you want to say, yes, run that script. Yes, do that thing. This is a great option for that because you can add a button right to the record in Airtable that then fires the Airtable extension, which is the scripting block. So let's take a peek at that. I'm going to go to my Airtable base, and at the very end, what I've done is I've added a button field. So you, at the very bottom of your list of field options is button. And once you add that field, your action can be to run a script. You're going to run a script. And the way that you add an Airtable script to an extension is you click on extensions, you click add extension, and Airtable scripting block is kind of right on the top right here. So you add that, hook it all up, and then whatever code or whatever script you've added to this scripting block, whenever you click this button, it will run that script based on this record. So you can click that button, fire up your Airtable script. Now you've got some manual oversight and you didn't need to create an interface. So that is option 3. Option 4 is really similar to option 3. The only difference is you're not actually adding a button to your base. So you don't have that button field. What you're doing is you're triggering the creation or triggering that script right from the Airtable extensions panel. So when you head over to Airtable, instead of having this column, you don't need it. What you can do is you can just hit run, and then what it'll do is it'll say pick a record that I'm going to run on. And when you pick that record, then you can choose from your record, and then you can fire your script. So there's a couple extra steps. I think you can actually get pretty fancy if you start doing some wild things with your script where you're collecting some information straight away that you'll actually need the panel to be open. But I don't use this one that often. Generally what I'm doing is I'm clicking a button to send my data to run a document automation. So that is option 4 though, is you don't need a button. You can trigger everything to be created from inside the Airtable extensions panel. So these are the 4 primary methods for triggering a scripting block inside of Airtable. Now, when I'm sitting down trying to figure out which method I should be using when creating my scripting blocks, I'm generally asking myself 2 questions. 1, do I want this to run in the background? If I want this to be something that just automatically runs, I'm going with option 1. That's really the only one that will automatically run. So does it need to be automatic? If yes, then I'm going with option 1. If no, if I want someone to actually click a button to then trigger the automation to run, then I'm looking at options 2 or 3. And the difference here is option 3 is only available to people who have access to the data view in the base, who have access to the whole base. So if it is going to be me or someone on my close team that is working inside of the base, and we know that we will always be the ones clicking that button, then I can go option 3. But if there's any chance that it's going to be someone that doesn't have access to the base, or it's going to be someone who isn't as familiar with Airtable, and so we're creating an interface for them, then what I'm doing is I'm going to go with option 2, and I'm going to use that button click to trigger my automation. So that's kind of my decision tree there is, do I want it to be automatic, and then who's going to click the button? Based on who's going to be clicking the button today in the future, that decides whether or not I'm going with option 2 or option 3. Hopefully that description was helpful. I know it was for me, just understanding all of the different ways that I can trigger my scripts from inside of Airtable just helps me more quickly get to the implementation that is most suitable for my specific workflow. So if it was helpful, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and we will see you at the next tutorial.